This wasn't the video I had planned on making this afternoon, but then when I opened up the TikTok app, I saw a video from my friend Christiana, and you can click this comment to go watch her whole video. Her account name is Possibility Maven, and I think that she has some of the most important content on TikTok. One of her consistent messages is that relationships, connection, community is the most abundant resource on the planet. I 100,000,000% agree with her, and I think that that dovetails really well with something that I've tried to consistently push throughout the last year, which is that we get out of this by leaning into our humanity, right? A lot of the videos I've made about nonviolent resistance techniques that have been used elsewhere in the world and throughout history that have been successful have really pivoted around us remembering our humanity and us reminding them of our humanity, and also us reminding them of theirs. And in her video where this comment was left, she's talking about how concerned she is about the dehumanizing language that is being used by people on our side about people on the other side. And I get it, right? There have been times that I have used language that's pretty dehumanizing, especially against Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, Trump himself, folks in the regime in particular that I personally feel are probably malignant narcissists. But I'm telling y'all, rejecting the premise of dehumanization is the way out of this. This quote in particular, an Indigenous creator on here that I can no longer find, said, "We don't need to get them to remember that we are human. We need them to remember that they are." And I think about it every day. I actually do think it's both, but that second part, right? They are able to disconnect from their humanity. That's how they're able to enact such terrible, brutal crimes against us, right? Against immigrants, against anybody that they are othering. That's the whole point of dehumanization. Right? That's the whole point of othering. That's why the regime uses this rhetoric. Illegals, gang members, extremists, leftists, domestic terrorists. That's why, like the things I've seen on Facebook over the last 24 hours from right-wing accounts, dehumanizing Renee, they have to do that to get people to set aside their own conscience and their own humanity to accept the kind of violence that is being carried out on a daily basis by the regime. But this is the reason that we hear Elon Musk saying humanity's greatest weakness is our empathy. This is the reason that you hear white Christian nationalist pastors now calling empathy a sin. It's because you have to get people to set aside their empathy, their ability to see the humanity in others. Like that's what our humanity is, right? Embracing the truth that we are all people. You have to get people to reject their own empathy, to gaslight themselves into shutting down their own empathy in order to get them to engage in acts of extreme brutality and violence against other people. It's the banality of evil, right? Like their psyches cannot accept it. Their conscience cannot accept it if they have to face the truth of what they're doing. It requires that they dehumanize other people in order to live with what they're doing. Dehumanization is the first step in oppression. Dehumanization is the first step in normalizing violence. Dehumanization is the first step toward war, toward genocide. Right? This is why conservatives have to get their hackles up when we say things like no human being is illegal, because they want to continue to use dehumanizing language to push their agenda. So they have to frame any attempt to be like, hey guys, let's remember our humanity. Let's remember that the people that you want to do terrible things to are also human beings. They have to push back against that as like woke PC language, because they need their base to shut down their sense of humanity and to dehumanize, to other us. I have a whole folder on my laptop about dehumanization and also about nonviolent resistance movements that really revolve around the concept of embracing our humanity and reminding the other side of theirs. And in there's an article from Vox from 2017, and there's a part of it that haunts me on a regular basis. And when I read this, I immediately thought of this passage. This article was published in Trump's first term at the height of when he was enacting Muslim bans. Remember what that was like. We have this incredible capacity for cooperation. It's what makes us human in many ways, and yet we have this capacity for othering. Dehumanization doesn't only occur during wartime. Nick Haslam, a psychologist who is the world's current leading expert on the topic, said, it's happening right here, right now. And every day, good people who don't see themselves as being prejudiced bigots are nevertheless falling prey to it. If the government can indoctrinate you, brainwash you into thinking that other groups of people are subhuman, then you are much less likely to resist the government enacting violence, human rights violations, right? Like if you think that those people are less than human, then you don't see them as being worthy of having human rights. You don't see the things that are being done to them as something that could happen to you. Your sense of empathy is very much cut off, right? And reading that paragraph again, like it just gives me chills to think that back in 2017 they were talking about how dehumanization, yes, it's a tool of war, but it doesn't just happen during wartime. It's been happening for years and years and years on the political right and has brought us to this moment we're in now. Right. Even back in 2017, this article was referencing what Israel was doing in Palestine. It also references World War II and other periods in our history where we clearly saw atrocities happening. And we said like, oh, Americans would never do that. We would never be like that here. Of course, that requires a tremendous ignorance of the civil rights movement. It requires a tremendous, like, just setting aside the ongoing genocide of Indigenous Americans that this government has been carrying out for hundreds of years. But I don't think that this article is wrong when it says, even though Americans don't like to talk about it, they are just as capable of blatant dehumanization. Right? The whole process of dehumanizing somebody else allows you to maintain your belief that you're still like a good, kind, compassionate person. You're not a bigot, because after all, the people you're mad at, the people that you're like, okay, with the government harming, hurting, depriving of rights, are people that you have somehow in your brain rationalized as less than human. They're not really people. They're like, pick your slur, right? And I know I've gotten frustrated with my Congresswoman, Maxine Dexter, but she's been really consistent in having this position that the way you get out of this is that you remember that the people across the aisle are in fact human beings. And I've been frustrated with the way that she's constantly bringing up at her town halls and other events this entire past year. She's consistently said, I'm trying to have those conversations. I'm trying to engage. I'm trying to reach out. I'm trying to reach across the aisle. And that it is through human interaction, it is through those conversations that we remind them of their humanity and that we remind them of ours. And there's times I've been like, your colleagues across the aisle are like full-on fascists. I mean, have you seen the things that Republicans have been tweeting out? Republicans in Congress have been tweeting out about Renee. But gosh, it's not about satisfying our anger, however righteous that anger may be. We are just as human as folks on the other side, and therefore we need to understand the way that we are just as susceptible to doing horrible things to other human beings if we dehumanize them. I'm sorry, my husband's still sick. I need to stop apologizing for that. Y'all just deal with it. There's coughing in my videos, and there will be for several more days. Anyway, Christiana is entirely correct. Maxine Dexter is entirely correct, as uncomfortable as that feels, right? We don't want to think about the ways that we are currently dehumanizing people on the other side and how that might be sabotaging our efforts to get out of it. No, it is sabotaging our efforts to get out of this. We are not going to get out of this by dehumanizing people on the other side. We are going to get out of this by constantly preaching to them, demonstrating to them their humanity and ours. So as the regime continues to escalate their violence against all of us, what does it look like for us to embrace our humanity? What does it look like for us to use that as a strategic choice? Not just the ethical choice, but a strategic choice. Because as my friend Tad Sturmer says, right, the regime has to dehumanize us further and further to justify the escalation of their violence. They have to claim that we're enemies of the state, that we're terrorists. They have to continue to other us, because otherwise they cannot get everybody to get on board and stay on board with what they're doing. So what does it look like for us to embrace our humanity as a tactical choice? I don't necessarily have like all the answers here. I'm asking for your input. I think that this is something that we have to strategize together. Listen to folks like Christiana. Go research other movements throughout history that have embraced their humanity as a successful tactic. And I really encourage you to resist the rhetoric that is proliferating online right now. As the regime is escalating their violence, it becomes easier and easier for us to dehumanize them because we're righteously angry, right? So what does it look like to reject that easy, like, fall into your anger in a way that might be self-sabotaging for us. Yeah, so please, I would love your thoughts. What does it look like to embrace our humanity as a tactical and moral choice?